Hi, my name is Morgan Brown and I'm a student here at Estes Park Middle School. Today I will be discussing with you some of the hot topics at Rocky Mountain National Park in 2010. First, we'll be discussing the pine beetle issue, then the elk culling process, and finally the deaths on Lungs Peak. We'll also be discussing how these issues can be prevented and the ongoing research. Thank you for watching and please enjoy the program.
I don't know if you've noticed, but if you look across the trees in our national park, there's a red hue developing. This is the leading result of the pine beetle infestation. The pine beetle epidemic has been a long-fought war in our nation, but never in Rocky Mountain National Park's history have we seen these devastating effects. Due to global climate change, the beetles find it easier to attack healthy stands of forest within the Rocky Mountain region. In addition to global conditions, trees have been weakened by prolonged periods of drought.
And now we are joined by Kyle Patterson, the Public Information Officer of Rocky Mountain National Park. She's going to be answering some questions about these topics. So Kyle, about the pine beetle issue, what is the leading reason why the beetle epidemic has struck our park?
Well, a lot of experts kind of call it the perfect storm. So it is a number of factors, and the beetles have certainly thrived for a number of factors. So drought conditions are certainly weakening the trees. So when you have these beautiful old trees that are now susceptible to drought, they become weaker and weaker. And we also have warmer winters than we used to. So in past times when we've had beetle epidemics, we might have had cold winters, and they've come through and killed some of the beetles as a result of that, but we haven't had those same cold winters. Our forests in Rocky Mountain National Park and the surrounding area are basically same age stands. So again, they're not very diverse in their age structure, and so those are a variety of factors that the beetles have just, again, capitalized on and thrived. And it's not just happening in Rocky Mountain National Park. The beetle epidemic is happening from British Columbia to Mexico.
Here in Estes Park, it is not odd to see a couple of elk wandering on city streets, but in the park there are a few less than there were before. Park officials have no certain way to estimate the total number of elk in the park. Some are estimating that the elk herd here has reached 1,600 to 2,100 animals. The local vegetation in Rocky Mountain National Park is becoming trampled and scarce because of the many elk searching for food. So, to create a solution, our rangers have decided to lessen the population by adaptive management strategies.
Once again, we're with Kyle Patterson, and we'll be discussing the elk culling and vegetation management in Rocky Mountain National Park. So, why has the elk population gotten so much bigger in the last few years?
We've done research over the last 20 years now, and basically found that the elk herds in Rocky Mountain National Park, where they spend their winters, are larger, less migratory, and more concentrated than they would be under natural conditions. We don't have an intact predator base in Rocky Mountain National Park, which means we don't have wolves or grizzly bears, but we do have coyotes and mountain lions. And wolves in particular have an impact on elk moving and migrating. And so since we don't have some of those natural conditions, the elk have been able to stay put. And when they stay put in an area, then our research has shown that they have impacted the willow and aspen communities significantly. And so why do we care? Because willow and aspen communities provide incredible habitat for a biodiversity of species, and that's why we care about the ecosystem's overall health, and that's why we're focusing on our elk and vegetation management plan.
What is the park doing to reduce the amount of vegetation waste from overpopulating elk?
So our big concern with vegetation is that we're seeing in the elk winter range that we're not seeing any new growth of aspen in the winter range, which means that there's only consistent age or older age stands of aspen. So when those aspen die, there will not be any younger ones to take their place. So that's our concern about aspen. And then willow, because they're being browsed and grazed so much, we're not seeing them develop into habitat for other species. So you might see a 50-year-old willow that's this high, which is not going to provide habitat for anything. So we're using a variety of tools we're fencing some areas in the park, very limited areas in the park, and then we're also culling elk to keep their population numbers down.
How does the elk culling process play out?
So in 2009, we started implementing the culling aspect of our elk and vegetation management plan. So our cull teams are very clinical, and they go out very early in the morning. We're usually done by 9 o'clock in the morning, and we do it during the winter time when our visitation is the least. And so we have not had to cull a lot of animals in the last 3 years because we've continued to see our population numbers stabilize in the park. And we now continue to manage for an elk herd inside the winter range of Rocky Mountain National Park from 600 to 800, and we are within that range right now. So what we've been doing the last couple of years is starting to do the culling operation, and then we adaptively manage, and every fall continue to look at how the population is has altered because of any kind of things we've done, or how many calves they've had, and then that makes the determination of how many animals we might need to cull the next winter.
2010 has been a busy year for incidents in Rocky Mountain National Park. Many of these could have been prevented. Among these events, we had 37 major search and rescue operations, and the park's regular 10-year average is 25. 3 of these rescue missions were deaths on Longs Peak. The climb to the top, the Longs Peak Keyhole route, is considered a Class 3 climb. Going off route or not paying close attention could be fatal, so anyone considering climbing Longs Peak needs to come prepared.
What is the leading cause of accidents on Longs Peak this summer?
We, as far as the leading cause of accidents on the Keyhole route, we have a number of falling accidents and falling fatalities in Rocky Mountain National Park. Falling is actually the leading cause of death in Rocky Mountain National Park, and so the Keyhole route, many times people consider it just being a hike, and they might not necessarily be prepared for the mountaineering aspect of that. And so we had 6 fatalities in Rocky Mountain National Park that were related to falling in 2010. They weren't all on the Keyhole route. They were from a variety of recreational outings. But on the Keyhole route, there are places that if you fall, you can fall quite a long distance, and or you're falling in a terrain that is very rocky, and so you're usually going to have some kind of significant injury, whether it's leg injuries or any kind of neck or head injuries. And so if people survive their falls in Rocky Mountain National Park on the Keyhole route, then usually it's a pretty serious rescue operation to try to get them down safely.
How did the park rangers and paramedics get them down and take care of them?
It really depends on the incident and where they fall along the Keyhole route. The other thing that plays into how we respond is the severity of the injury. So oftentimes what we do first is we send a hasty team of rangers to the location. And what we mean by hasty team is a group of rangers that are basically moving very quickly. They might have very light packs so that they can get up to the patient as quickly as possible to assess their conditions. We also rely on people that might be bystanders in that area as well, but oftentimes cell phone connections aren't the best, but sometimes if there is a good cell phone connection, they can help us in assessing the severity of the injury as far as how we respond. A hasty team of park rangers first arrives on scene and assesses the injury of the person, and then determines the seriousness or severity of it. That's how we then determine how we're going to respond. So sometimes we'll bring a Flight for Life helicopter in, and basically we talk with availability from hospitals along the Front Range to see if they have a helicopter available. The flip side of that is whether the weather conditions allow us to fly in. And so sometimes we've had many instances in the past where we have not been able to fly somebody out. Mm-hmm. So sometimes people's expectations are that if they're hurt in the backcountry, we're going to pluck them out and get them to a hospital in a matter of minutes or hours, and that's rarely the way that it happens when you're miles and miles in the backcountry.
Are there any safety tips or precautions you want to share to make sure that future hikers don't get injured?
Absolutely. The biggest thing that people can do is bring their common sense with them, and it's amazing how many people forget that when they go out hiking in the park. particularly if we want to focus on the keyhole route, there are people that, again, feel like it's just a hike, and they need to realize that it's a 7.5 mile hike to the summit of Longs Peak along the keyhole route, and the last 1.5 miles is by far the most difficult. So some people get the 6 miles and they're fatigued, or they're reacting adversely to the high altitude, and they might have summit fever and think, oh, I'm only a mile and a half away from the summit, but that's basically the toughest mile and a half that's left. It's the most exposure, it's the most physically demanding, and so that's one thing that people really need to continue to check in with themselves and see how they're feeling, and just enjoy the experience along the way rather than continuing to think that they have to summit. So that's one of the main things we try to tell people, particularly when they're going on the keyhole route. The other thing, again, is to very much listen to how their body's reacting to high altitude. People react differently. It has no connection to fitness levels. Some people will react adversely to high elevation one trip, and then the next trip feel fine, or vice versa. So fluids and making sure that you have lots of food fuels along the way are really important as well. And again, it's the physical ability and the common sense. The people that perished on the keyhole route this last year were by themselves, and so we encourage people to make sure that they're hiking or mountaineering with someone else rather than doing that alone. Again, if something terrible happens, then they will have somebody that will be able to assist them more, or at least go and get help. So a lot of it comes down to really making good decisions internally as far as whether you can continue and whether you have prepared yourself either with the gear that you've brought with you and or your physical fitness before you leave the trailhead. So really, that's what it comes down to often.
That is some great information. Thanks a lot, Kyle, for coming out and talking to us.
Thank you, Morgan. Appreciate your interest.